We almost made it on time. It's Ross's fault, really. We were all ready. Thank you to Ross, who was preaching in Rimby this morning, and so the road.
I got a little carried away.
The road hum is still in his ears, and it's Communion Sunday and everything else that makes services extend. So anyway, I'm glad that you're here, Ross, and hope that your indigestion isn't too bad from having wolfed a bowl of chili. So just to mention again, what we're doing here is. From my perspective as a minister, there's a dual purpose here. One is to eventually make a decision about whether we might want to have drag shows here at the church on a regular basis, something that's been requested of us. And so partly that's what we're doing, but the other thing is I think it's really important for us to be able to have difficult conversations in our day without those conversations dividing us as a church. We need to learn, I think it's an essential skill for the United Church and for this church and really for society to be able to have deep and contentious conversations and build each other up at the same time. So partly what we're doing is we're kind of going through a process that I hope will reaffirm those skills in us. So for this time, we have a panel that will occupy the spot up here. Ross has graciously agreed to be our moderator and has put a fair bit of work into it. Thank you for that, Ross. Once we start the panel, it'll just be Ross and the panelists who speak. So this is just an information gathering session. The time that we'll be able to talk with each other is down the road. The other thing is we've had a lot of questions submitted, and I'm pretty sure we're not going to get to all of them. So if we don't get to yours, I trust we will. If as the process goes, you feel like your question has been left dangling, come see me and come see people in the Affirm team, and we'll make sure that we don't continue that. Okay, I think we're set. So I'll invite the panel forward, and thank you again to all of you who have agreed to do this. And here we go. Just ask them to invite me up.
Well, thank you. Just a minute. I have to put take the mute button, but I have to find this thing first. Okay, there we are. Okay, there we are. Well, thank you very much for the honor that you do me in inviting me to be here and to moderate this conversation today. My apologies for I got a little carried away at Rimby. Many of you that remember me as the minister of this church remember that I was never very disciplined about how long services went. I remember, in fact, Earl Clark getting quite mad at me on one occasion. Those of you who have been around a long time might remember Earl, and he was very annoyed with me about how undisciplined I was about that. And I used to tell him that the hymn "Sweet Hour of Prayer" that doesn't refer to the whole worship service. That just refers to the prayers. So you're being entirely too hard on me. So anyway, I was the minister here during when we became an affirming congregation, and I want to just briefly kind of just remind people of a little bit of the history of how that happened. So back in 1988, those of you who have been around that long, it's almost, 35, 37 years now, 36, 30, my math is not good, quite a long time ago, it was really hard in this congregation. It was very traumatic for the reasons that Dave identified, is that it was hard for people in the church to actually kind of disagree with each other. And it became very divisive, and people left, and this church actually made a decision that they would not. So what happened at the national church is that the national church said, sexual orientation was not a barrier to ministry. And that was, after 2 or 3 years of kind of wrangling about that, that was the decision they made. And people in this congregation decided that they would not accept, and there was a vote at a congregational meeting, I think, that they would not accept a gay minister. And that was policy. Until we became an affirming congregation. But it wasn't that simple. So it was around 2000, in the early 2000s, we kind of, we started a group. There was a group of people in this congregation who had gay and lesbian kids, and gay and lesbian siblings, and gay and lesbian friends. And they formed a support group. And that support group, over time, became not just a support group for them, started out as a support group for them, because most of them had never talked to another parent who had had a gay kid. And most of them had been quiet. Most of them had been silenced during that 1988 event. So we started a support group, and it gradually became a support group for the whole community, and it got advertised in the community, and it was kind of their idea to, let me back up. So 2007, I think it was, that the Alberta government, the Alberta Human Rights Tribunal made the decision that same-gender marriage would be the law, legally available in Alberta. And so we went through a process of talking about, a process of discernment, talking about whether we would offer marriage to same-gender couples. And because it was the policy in the United Church is that's the responsibility of the church, of local churches. So, and we went through we had a process of discernment that involved small groups and all kinds of things, not dissimilar to what's happening now. And at that time, the decision that we made was not yet, because it was going to be a painful decision for some people in our congregation. About 5 years went by. At that point, we hadn't had a request for a same-gender marriage, so there wasn't any real urgency around making the decision. So we said, not yet. And then 5 years later, we did get a request. And so the decision came back up, and it felt, and so by that point, the Pathways group, as it was called at that point, said, rather than make a decision about this kind of narrow issue, whether we perform same-gender marriage, let's think about whether we'd become an affirming congregation. And I was a bit uncomfortable with that. I went along with the Affirm group, with the Pathways group kind of decision to explore that. So we did, and we went through another process of discernment. And one of the things that really struck me about that is that, after that really painful time in 1988, I wasn't here in 1988, but I remember how difficult it was for the United Church as a whole. Having a really careful process of discernment, it just lowered the temperature so much, and we'd come so far since 1988. So it was actually, I think it was actually really healing for the congregation to have that conversation and to decide initially not yet, and then later we became an affirming congregation. And I said, initially I wasn't really that comfortable with it because I knew that becoming affirming was going to be kind of painful for some people in the congregation, and it was. But for the most part, I think it was a good thing for this congregation because it helped us to clarify our sense of ourselves, our sense of our mission in the church, our sense of our theology, and what we believed and who we were. So that's And at the time, when we became an affirming congregation, one of the things that we said, and I think was really clear, I hope was really clear, was that being affirming does not mean it's once and done. So I sometimes think that our church has got the wrong name. We're called a united church, which implies that it's kind of, all the important stuff happened back then. It's in the past, united in the past, that's done. In Australia, there's a uniting church, which I think would be a lot better name for us too, which implies that it's kind of an ongoing process. Being uniting, not united, is ongoing. And so that's why it's affirming. It's not affirmed, it's affirming. So we said at the time that we became affirming, this will be an ongoing process. And we will have to have, there will be issues that will come up that we'll have to deal with. So it should not be surprising to any of us that issues are coming up. And that's okay, because we can deal with them as a community of faith. And that's okay. Now, full disclosure, some of you may know that Dave and Karen and I were part of the same youth group growing up in the same congregation, Knox Metropolitan United Church in Edmonton. And one of the things that as a youth group we did, it was a fairly active youth group, even though we didn't have any adult leaders, and we would put on dramatic productions from time to time. And for one of those dramatic productions, we decided to put on a farce that was called Snow White and the Seven or So Dwarves. And now, to give you an idea of this, one of the dwarves was 6'5". And the person that they chose to play Snow White was a person with a full beard. And there was only one of us in the group that had a full beard, and that was me. So with the help of a cover girl wig, and Karen has never let me forget this. In fact, I think I had forgotten it, but Karen has never let me forget it. I think and I think she still has pictures, which I'm still kind of negotiating about the price of what to get, how much to get these. So a cover girl wig, a couple of strategically placed balloons. I became Snow White. I kind of was thinking about that this past week as I'm thinking about drag. Was I in drag? I don't know. I don't actually know whether I was in drag or not. So that may be one of the things we'll talk about is, I don't remember was there drag at that time. So anyway, but at the time it was in fun and everybody took it in fun. And I don't remember it being particularly controversial. Do you remember it being particularly controversial? It certainly wasn't the most controversial thing that youth group did. Not by a long shot. Anyway, so if you can picture, Snow White in, a dress and V-neck dress and a cover girl wig. And what's the line? Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Jonathan, as I want you to know, I think you rock that look. But when it comes to being what I was, am, and always will be the fairest in all the land. I'm the fairest of them all. And so, okay. Can I just add, dressing as a woman and playing with the boundaries of male and female has had a long history, and I was not the first or the last in that. It's mostly been seen as joyful and playful, and fun and playful. It's a theme, for example, that Shakespeare explored, in his, I think it was As You Like It, as one of his comedies, at least one of his comedies. And, there's been some quite wonderful movies in which this, people have Tootsie is my favorite. Mrs. Doubtfire is pretty good. Casual Fall is another one. Anyway, there's been quite a number of explorations of this theme. So, some of us think of drag as something that's kind of like unusual. It does, I do have some discomfort around this theme, but my intent for this event is I'm just going to notice my discomfort. I'm going to notice it. I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to set it aside for the time being. Set aside for the time being my preconceived notions about what it means about drag. I'm going to try and listen carefully. I'm going to try and learn what I can. I have questions. I know many of you have questions. I don't expect all of my questions to be answered. I'm pretty sure we won't get to all the questions that people have had today, but this will be one step in the process of discernment, and there will be other steps along the way. In engaging this process, this question before us, I also hope to learn more about discernment, to practice the art of discernment, because I think it is an art, and to grow in discerning God's leading and direction. And I want to echo something that Dave kind of said, was that in doing this, I think we offer a real gift to the wider community, because, oh my God, the society is getting so polarized. I mean, you're either in this camp or in that camp, and people decide what camp you're on based on. I had somebody recently who said, I can tell from what you just said, that you're in that camp, that you're the other guys. And I said, you don't know me hardly at all. How can you make that kind of judgment? And you sort of assume that because I said something, that therefore there's no nuance, there's no care to what I said. So anyway, I just think we as a society need to offer this as a church, we need to offer this to our society, that we can engage these kinds of decisions, these kinds of conversations in a wise, in a loving, in a thoughtful way, and move past them. We're going to be asking one of the practices of discernment is to ask open and honest questions, and that means open honest questions, honest, genuine questions, that things we really wonder about. And another one, open, meaning not leading, not assuming that you already know the answer, but open questions that are not leading. So one question I have that I'm going to ask people to eventually get to, not necessarily right away, is how drag is different than Shakespearean comedies, how it's different from me dressing up in a church youth group play. I'm wondering about the performances that drag queens and kings are putting on in public libraries and for children, and is that what this is going to look like? I have a lot of questions, so I'll try and throw those in along with your questions as we move forward here. So I've taken the liberty of taking the questions that you submitted, and I looked at them carefully, and I kind of combined them and rejigged them and worded them so that they were open and honest questions. Most of all, I rejigged them so that they answered the questions I have, because I'm really a very selfish person. So anyway, one thing I'll just invite you to, there's a process of discernment that I've really come to appreciate, and that is, it's put out by the Center for Courage and Renewal, and they have this process they call the Circles of Trust process. And they have a group of touchstones, and one of those touchstones is, when the going gets tough, turn to wonder. When the going gets tough, turn to wonder. So, I wonder why I'm feeling that way. I wonder why that other person is saying that or doing that, or why that other person believes that. I wonder. So it's an approach to challenging issues that is opening ourselves. So when the going gets tough, let me just encourage you through this process of discernment that's maybe not starting today, but will continue through several weeks at least. Turn to, when you find yourself being challenged, turn to wonder. Okay, so that's enough for preliminaries. So I'm just going to invite, and it might be that we might need to take some time for silence through that process too. That's also a good way to kind of to engage this. So I'm going to invite the panelists to introduce themselves and to say a little bit. And you really only need maybe 2 or 3 lines, but that's enough. Okay.
I'm Dave Holmes. I'm one of the ministers at St. Andrew's United Church in Lacombe.
I'm Sheila Cunningham. I'm from Red Deer. I live, work, and worship in Red Deer at Gateman's Memorial United Church. I'm the treasurer there, and I'm on the Affirm Committee. I've got 3 adult kids that I raised here in Lacombe, and they all graduated from Lacombe. And I've been out femininely as a woman for the last couple of years.
And was on our M&P committee, weren't you, for quite a while? You were a very active person in this congregation. Yeah.
Well, I'm Jonathan, like earlier. Jonathan Lacombe. I've lived in Lacombe for quite a few years. I'm a part of several boards, but main one being Lacombe Pride, starting Lacombe Pride, as well as just kind of some other boards within the city. I believe in community. I'm a drag artist as well. My name is Lush Panic. A little history of that. It's the beginning of my last name. Pan, because I am pansexual. And then Hick, because Lacombe in my mind is sometimes a little hick town in the middle of nowhere. So that's my name for you.
Can I just ask, are people having trouble hearing? No? Okay. It's because I'm so close to you. I'm going to invite people to speak slowly so that the words come through clearly. Okay?
Yeah, and I have a tendency to speak very fast. So.
I'm Candace Kickstra, and I'm a mother of 4 kiddos, and 3 of whom are queer. And so my journey has been with their lead. What that looks like for our family, what looks like in community, which we're involved in. We have the rainbowiest house in town usually, so that's where I am.
And as we know, I am Rick. You see me up, I was part of the choir. This year I'm taking a break from it. I'm part of the Affirm Committee here in this church. I am an openly gay male, so never had anybody come with questions. So I guess we're all good with that, eh?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for agreeing to do this, because I know it can be a little bit nerve-wracking to do something like this. So I appreciate your being willing to do it. So I want to just start by asking if, I'm going to pose questions, and I'm going to kind of pick somebody to start us out. Okay, and this is going to be relatively arbitrary. But not everybody on the panel is going to have a chance to address every question. If we do that, we will be here. We won't have to worry about the time. We'll have to worry about the date. Okay. So I'm going to invite one person to answer the question, and then I'm going to give anybody else that feels there's something they want to add to that to chime in. But hopefully not more than 2 or 3 people addressing each question, okay? So, but if everybody needs to address a question, we could do that, okay? So, but we can't do it for every question, okay? So, so the first question is simply, and this actually is one that combines several questions. What does drag mean? What does queer mean? What does non-binary mean? And are there distinctions, differences between those things? So I'm just gonna, who wants to start out on that one? Okay.
Hello? Oh, perfect. That was a lot. Okay. So for me, so actually something about me as well is that I'm pansexual, but I'm also identify
Again,
as,
slowly.
sorry. I also identify as gender fluid. So basically what that means is that I don't really align with a specific gender. So I don't align with male, but I don't align with female either. But some days I might feel more feminine, some days I might feel more masculine, and I go by she, he, they pronouns. So there's really nothing, like you can't call me anything that's gonna offend me. I'm also one of those people where I'll correct you and you don't really offend me, so don't ever be afraid to ask pronouns too. I always say that that's really important. But kind of what drag is, essentially, from my own personal journey, and everyone's is very different. When I started drag, I was looking for a community that I could lean into my feminine side a little bit more. Because I didn't really identify straight masculine or very much or straight feminine, I was wanting to be able to have a little bit of I call it a gender bend. It's not so much something, so I perform drag with a beard. I actually don't shave, so I use my beard as a way for me to communicate that drag isn't just about being a woman to me. Drag, to me, is an art form because it encapsulates an identity and it showcases a different part of you than what you show regularly. So if anyone's ever come to my show or come to a show where I'm in it, I'm very much my persona. I'm very much Lush. Like that's who I am, and it's very different than someone I regularly am on the outside, though I still lean in that gender bendy way. So for me, when I started drag, it was a point where I could come into and reclaim a little bit more of my queerness, because we live in a town that doesn't always welcome difference and diversity or inclusion. You have to find those spaces and you have to make them for yourself. So drag was a way for me to step outside and say, okay, I'm not always welcomed as this person every day in my community, but you know what, let's just be confident and try this, because that gave me a way for me to use who I am and my art to kind of make people uncomfortable. And again, I think Dave touched on it, is that when we are uncomfortable, we have to question kind of why we're uncomfortable, and we have to work with that. We have to figure out, okay, where do we go from that, and how are things and why are things uncomfortable? So for me, drag evolves around this idea that it should be art, that it's a way for you to express yourself in a different form, in either a more masculine or feminine form that you regularly don't get to do, or that society doesn't welcome you to do, or that you don't feel safe to do on a regular basis, and puts it into a community aspect. So whenever I do a show, I'm with my peers. I'm with the people who love and support me because they're there to cheer me on, and they're there to create space for me. So that's kind of what drag is to me specifically.
So Russ, part of the question is about what do all the letters in LGBTQ plus stand for? And so the L is for lesbian, the G is for gay, the B is for bisexual. Those are all to do with sexuality. So who are you sexually interested in? And then the T largely is for trans, so that's people who are either often born masculine and feel feminine, or born feminine and feel masculine. The other part of that is people who are non-binary. So they don't feel masculine or feminine. They feel somewhere in between. And the other piece of that too is people who are two-spirited, and they feel that they are actually both. Queer can often be a combination of gender and sexuality that doesn't really well encompassed by any of those letters individually. So I like what Jonathan said on drag, but just wanted to help provide context to everybody about those individual letters of the alphabet.
Thank you. That's pretty clear. How would you say, as a follow-up, I've got some follow-up questions to this first one, which is basically about what is drag, and how is drag different from a person who dresses in ways that challenge gender norms every day? So Sheila, Scott, Jonathan, and others, how's drag different than that?
So I dress feminine all day, every day. And the best questions I get are from 6-year-olds, where they come up to me and with a horrified parent beside them and they say, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And the parents are just beside themselves, horrified. And I've learned to just bend down and get down at their level and tell them, well, I'm tall and strong and have a deep voice like a boy, and I like dresses and makeup and heels like a girl. And they usually go, "Oh." And their parent is shaking because they don't know what to say or do, but it's just the curiosity of that age. But I don't consider myself in drag. This is just an expression of my femininity. And so as John has talked about, drag is much more of a performance. It's much more about being on stage. It's much more about preparing, rehearsing for an individual hour or however long your set is. Not a lot different than a musician. I think musicians are actually a really good example or comparable, that often a church would have musicians come in and perform. And so it's not just the musician and the instrument they play, but it's also the songs that they choose and the message of those songs and their props that are the message. If a major music label wanted to rent part of St. Andrews and it was Anne Murray singing Songbird, that's probably a yes, is my hunch. If it's Motley Crue wanting to perform Shout at the Devil, that's probably a no. But they're both music acts. And so how do you devise a policy that fits your principles as a congregation is, to me, a big piece of the question moving forward.
Okay, thank you.
I'll also touch on that as well. And I think something that is really big and what Candace pointed out was that this is Sheila. That is who she is. Drag is a part of me, but it's not inherently who I am. I am Jonathan outside of my drag persona, but while I'm in drag, it's a completely different part. So it's like, I always say it's like a ballet dancer or like a regular dancer, or say if you're an actor on a play, where that art form is a part of you and you love it, and it's, that's something you do, it's something you involve yourself with, it's something you create, and it's something you display. Same with drag. Drag is an art form for me to display different parts of myself that I can't regularly do. I can't regularly wear wigs on, well, I could, but it would be hot and exhausting, I tell you. There's different, I can't regularly lip sync or can't regularly do graphic well, I do quite a bit of makeup, but the level of drag makeup, because it's extensive. So when it comes down to it, when Sheila's explaining like why she loves to wear dresses or the regular part of her everyday life, that is just who she is. And she's beautiful, but this is who I am as well. So this is me on a daily basis. I like to dress a little bit more feminine as well. I love to just be myself. And people can ask me questions about that and all that fun stuff. But while I'm in drag, I am not Jonathan. I am a completely different person, and I'm performing because it's a different part of who I am that I get to display to other people who can feel the passion of the heart. We act, we dance, we sing because we want people to feel invigorated by our art, to feel like they have a community, to feel like they belong, to feel like they're being heard, or we write songs to address a certain problem. I use drag in a very similar way, and a lot of drag artists do, is that drag used to be a lot about being a woman. It's kind of elevated itself into a spot where it's now considered an art form where anyone can do drag, and that what you choose to do with it is your own direction. What I love to choose to do with it, I've done multiple different shows where it supported different organizations, and I've sang different songs. I don't know if anyone was at the Lacombe Pride drag show, but I did a song where it was an emotional piece that connected me to who I was when I was younger and the struggle I faced loving myself and loving my body. And in drag, I got to perform this song that I related to a lot when I was young, and that I related to a lot. And I got to be this persona and showcase what Jonathan had to go through in drag to get to where he is today, where they are today, and to really create something for themselves. So that, I hope, answers some of that.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to try and answer my own question, when I dressed up as Snow White, it was kind of like drag, but not really, because I really wasn't kind of like as serious about it as drag queens and drag kings are, because it wasn't really I wasn't really trying to really express something that was really deeply part of me. So, is that a good answer? Can we just move on from there? Okay, all right. Can we talk about what different kinds of drag events there are? I know that there have been public libraries have been hosting drag queens and kings to read to children. So does somebody want to, Candace, you want to address that?
So from what I've seen is the same, the drag story time where Jonathan, for example, maybe would come in, I don't want to, would come in a big floofy dress or whatever it was and read a story to children and just talk to them and answer questions. That's what a drag story time looks like when I've seen it. And I've seen Kelly do one where she danced with the kids to a very poppy song and they all just did like some actions. It was lots of fun. The kids had a great time. Another drag event that I've seen in Edmonton in the United Church up there is their youth put on a drag show every month, and so they gather and it's kind of like a talent show kind of thing, where they each have the opportunity to do that and they give back to different things in the community. Sometimes it's shelters, sometimes it's the church itself. So I've seen that, and then there's teas and brunches, and there's different levels, just like there is in any art, where some of them may not be appropriate for certain places, but that doesn't mean that it's all encompassing. So, yeah, I feel like that's it.
As well, on top of that, is that, like what Candace said, is that there's different drag shows for different styles. So, like, our Lacombe Pride one, that one was 18 plus. It was for adults, and it was more catered to the queer community. So it was something that they're used to. If someone, and I talked to a few people, if someone had come out and this was their first time doing a drag show, and they came to that, they would be quite shocked. It's quite a lot. It's very much out there, very, very adult-esque. But it's for our community. It's kind of for our space and for the people that want to have their authentic drag show. It's not to teach them what drag is. It's not really to, it's not really to connect it. It's more so just to have fun. It's like a gala or formal. Whereas sometimes when we do, say if we do one at a library, it is to show that drag is for everyone. It is to show that drag is an art form that you can use in different environments, and that someone dressing up or someone being a different part of their identity is nothing wrong with that. It's how you use that different part of the identity in that certain situation. So making sure that, like what you said, you usually read a book on something about inclusion or loving yourself or finding a community, or I think one of the ones I've seen is like the bucket filling one. I don't know if you've ever seen that one. It's all about what we can teach kids from a drag perspective. I can teach them to love themselves, to listen to who they are and to believe who they are, to listen and to be present and all that fun stuff. And that's what I can use in that space. So every drag show is very different. And so it kind of creates a very vast area. So there's like adult plays, you have kids plays. It's very much in a line with that.
Thank you. There was one question that I thought was really well worded that was submitted by the congregation. That's not to say that the rest of them weren't. It's just, this one actually, I'm just going to read it the way it was submitted, because it's a bit intimidating as a question, but Rick, so I'm going to invite you to kind of maybe start us out in this. What about drag is significant or important to some, likely not all, but some, in the queer community? I'm going to use queer as kind of for the whole gamut. Help us to understand the cultural context, history, current desire, and importance of having this form of expression for your community. So, as I said, it's a bit of an intimidating question. So don't feel like you have to cover the whole history, cultural context, current desire, and importance of the whole community. But I mean, why? What the question is, what is significant or important about drag in your community?
Oh, there we go. That's a loaded question, honestly. One of them's on too, or what? Yeah, so drag in the queer community is a very important thing because it does come from history. There was the Stonewall riots, which started the whole Pride Society. That was the day people finally fought back for their rights. And a big part of that came from Marsha P. Johnson. And she was a beautiful black woman that was murdered just for who she was. And that caused a big problem. And just because of that, that hatred towards someone that was a little different, that dressed in female clothing, acted feminine, drag kind of came from that, as well as a kind of a, yeah, well, we're going to do it anyways. And then it just grew from there and kind of became this huge thing that now is a very important part of the queer society, because it still keeps us to the roots of where a lot of us didn't have to fight from, where we got to be who we are and not have to go through those turmoils that everybody else did as well. And there are still people to this day that are still alive that went through that, where they were jailed, they were murdered just for going to a drag show in a bar.
And probably most famously, the one in, was it Orlando, Florida, the nightclub shooting where there was 50, 60 people killed? Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, so that's, I mean, it's a good answer, Rick, thank you. The part the question doesn't address really, but kind of asks about, is just about the safety of meeting other queer people. Because it's hard to be queer. It doesn't matter what letter you are. It's hard to hide your authenticity, who you are inside from society. To be gay and walk down the street with your partner and not hold hands because you're judged when you see other male and female couples walking and doing that, and that's fine. So it's hard to hide. And it's hard to be out, because the same gay couple walking down the street holding hands are going to be judged. So they have to choose between hard and hard. There is no easy. And drag shows are one way, and part of it is the historic roots, that the community, a space where they feel safe, where that gay couple, they feel comfortable cuddling in each other's arms, that they're not going to get judged, that they're not going to be hurt, that they're not going to go home and cry because of whatever happened to them that day. So that's a key piece of why drag is important. It's not just the performance, but it's a collecting group, it's a magnet for those who will be a safe space.
Thank you. Can I just say that, I mean, that's a big part of why, as a church, we became an affirming congregation, because we wanted to be really open about and intentional about being a safe space for people who didn't conform to the majority. So, and for me personally, it was, you know, I supported it, even though I was a bit uncomfortable about it at the beginning. I supported it because, you know, when I first came to Lacombe, I did a funeral for a young man who was probably bisexual, and the suicide rate, he took his own life, and his family told me, you know, when they were describing him, and I said, you know, he sounds from what you're describing that he was, you know, he was a bit, he didn't, was he gay? And they said probably bisexual, but it's the suicide rate among queer people is really, really high. And I said, I never want to have to do another funeral like that. I want this to be a place where, and I knew there was a lot of families in our congregation who had, there were children who grew up in this congregation who had gay and lesbian kids. And there were people who grew up in this congregation who discovered that they were gay and lesbian, identified later as gay and lesbian. So I don't want anybody, especially from this congregation, to ever go through that. So
I'll also just add something here as well, just from, I'll add kind of three main things. Another kind of unspecific time where drag came from was actually during Shakespeare's life. So during Shakespeare's plays, men assumed the roles of female people or females on stage because females were not allowed to perform on a stage. So one of the acronyms, or the drag acronym, can kind of be treated, it's not confirmed, but is an idea if you look on the strip, on their script, it'll say dress as a woman or drag, where it's kind of like this acronym that they've used, dress as a girl, and that was where they used for men to feel like, okay, this is where I change into this outfit, or this is where this comes from. So there's traces back even further than some of the more modern day history that comes up in. I also wanted to touch on something Sheila said too, was that drag and why it's so important, and I've always said this, drag is political. It's a way for us, it's always, like Rick said, it's a way for us to say, well, you want to come for us? We're gonna step up even further. We're going to amplify our voices even more. We're going to make sure you hear us. And sometimes drag queens are the loudest people in the room because they have seriously nothing to lose. They are parts of society that were shunned, they were killed, they were kicked out, they were pushed aside. And that, in and of itself, we have nothing to lose. We can say, screw you, government, and it won't affect us because we have lost so much already in our own communities and with our own families and with people that we thought loved us. We've lost so much. So when we say drag is political, we're saying, this is us coming to you and going, hey, you know what? Change has to happen, and sometimes drag queens will be the loudest and the ones to lead it first. They're the ones that kind of take the charge, again, because they have nothing to lose. And so I've used my drag in many different ways to be political. But also it's just a way to say, and if you look at the United States specifically, when they're passing laws against drag, it's inherently making it political. But they are the ones adding to the hatred that we experience and don't understand that when you attack people, and attack specifically drag queens, we get sassy and we come back to bite you in the butt. So I was like, we come back hard, and we were like, no, you want to come for us, we'll come for you, because we have nothing to lose. We have this confident part of ourselves that we never had before in any other space, and we're able to use that and to project it out and say, please, come at me, because you won't win. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit about that.
So can I follow up on that? So I know there's been a lot of hostility, especially south of the border, but probably here too, public library events. What was the term used? The phrase used? Reading with royalty events. And it's kind of become a flashpoint. It's become, and I would call it a political wedge issue. That I think in some ways people are intentionally, are they intentionally, not intentionally, let me pull back the word intentionally. Is all of that based on a misunderstanding of what's actually going on? Is it disinformation? And in what ways is that hostility kind of affecting this conversation that we're having today? Candace, do you want to? You're ready to go? Okay.
Yeah, sure. Well, this is the type of question I expected a question along these lines today, so that's why I'm ready. So a bunch of the things you talked about there, Ross, they tie into beliefs and what do people believe. And so I've been out publicly for 2 years now, and so I've spent a fair bit of time with the queer community, and I've actually, because just of my upbringing and who's been accepting and affirming of me in my life, I'm quite comfortable talking with conservatives. So I spend a lot of time talking to conservatives as well. I believe in being a diplomat, and by talking to their ear, who in Alberta are the government, that's my way of talking truth to power. And here's what I've come to understand that kind of the hard positions on both sides are. And the hard position on the political left, and Jonathan's kind of alluded it to today, that there's nothing to lose, is a belief that the announced upcoming restrictions in Alberta are the first of many, many steps. And that is by looking at what's happening in the US for legislation. And there's also a look back to the interwar period in Germany, the 1920s and 30s, where they look back that Germany at that time was a very sexual and gender liberal place. And that turned out that after that liberality in Germany, the next step was the groups started getting marginalized, and then they were the problem, and that led to concentration camps and gas chambers. And there's a significant number of people in the queer community in Alberta that they believe, that's their belief, that that's the future in Alberta in the coming years and decades. That this is the first, these restrictions announced by the provincial government are the first step in a march to gas chambers and concentration camps in this province. Now, you mentioned sometimes you have to sit in silence. That's heavy. But that's real that people believe that. That's why the community as a whole is fighting so hard against those restrictions now. Now, on the other side, on the political right, those people see that what they believe is that the government, they believe that the trans community or the LGBT community as a whole, it depends on how they term it, but has captured the education and health systems and is using those systems to steal their children's hearts, minds, and even their souls. Now, both of those are heavy. But so we talk about, and each of those groups believes they are supported by facts and reality, and they've got whatever list matches for. And you know what? If they show each other their list of facts, it's not going to change their minds. It's really not. And so that's the environment we are in right now. And my hope is that this is the worst of the times. I don't believe either of those positions are correct. And I compare it because I work for a government agency and I will understand the cycles of legislation. We're in the time period of speculation between an announcement and between the details. I compare it back to the first bill that the Premier announced, the Sovereignty Act. There was a lot of speculation about what that would mean to Canada. 6 months later, the details came out, and most of that speculation went away. We're still in the speculation phase for the next few months, and there's going to be news, for sure. Many articles, much speculation. And so we'll see. I am hopeful that the details, after the details are released, that they address the most critical points. But we'll see. No one knows until they actually come out. So that answers part of your question, but I'm sure I didn't answer parts of it. So others, go ahead.
So I'm just trying to think back to what I was triggered by, but like what made the facial reaction that Ross saw. But what I think drag can do for youth, for anyone, is just to see, and why it's out there more and things like that, is just to see themselves represented. Yeah, and queer, that's one thing that, like, Jonathan was just whispering in my ear, is like, I want my kids to see queer adults thriving, that they're not living in fear, and that they're, and so maybe they're putting on a drag show at the library, but that's just reading a story, and that maybe there's a child there who sees that is, they can just identify with it, that they want to be flamboyant. It has nothing to do with their sexuality. They just want to maybe act out and wear something different, and clothes are just clothes, right? And so we want to see that, and I want my children to see that. I don't want them to live in fear about it, so.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't know if this is the time to say this, but I just want to remember that the one we follow, Jesus, was crucified by the Roman Empire. And it's hard to imagine sometimes why someone who preached love and care for other people would attract such a violent response. But sometimes I think what we do in the name of love and care for one another, it does bring a reaction, and it's sometimes we think that we are doing something wrong if the society around us responds with anger or violence, or if something within ourselves responds with fear or anger or whatever. And I just think it's important to remember that. Sometimes real love stirs up stuff.
Okay, thank you. I did some research for this, and I looked up drag, and I found this kind of explanation or rationale for drag on a website. So I want to read it to you, and then I want, if it seems to you to be perfectly accurate, just nod. If there's something you think needs to be added or revised in it, you can grab your mic, okay? So what all drag performers have in common, is that they are people challenging, subverting, and dismantling traditional ideas of gender by performing heightened versions of masculinity, femininity, and everything in between. Want me to read it again?
I would say, yeah, that's a great definition to kind of introduce drag, because as much as it is that all drag performers, like, they do that, some drag performers will use drag specifically to amplify their own gender. So a lot of, say, trans individuals will do drag because it's giving them the space to be a lot more feminine. It's giving them a space to be a lot more themselves in a space that would welcome them. But I think Sheila probably has something to say, because I didn't think about the question enough.
So that's the heightened versions of masculinity, femininity part. Yeah, right? Okay, so.
I think what that definition might be missing is it doesn't give space for those who just enjoy it and have fun. For a straight man who enjoys wearing dresses and is okay doing it in public, but that's not who they are otherwise in their life. And it's not necessarily, it's less of a political statement. That suggests everything's political, but changing the world, it's like they might just do it because it feels good and they have fun.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I'll just add on quickly with that too, because now that I'm thinking about it, yeah, perfect. No, that's a really good add-on to that, is that one of the people, if you ever look up RuPaul's Drag Race, there's a queen named Maddie Morphosis. Maddie Morphosis identifies as a straight drag queen. She was on RuPaul's Drag Race, she has a girlfriend, but she finds it's just a way for her to have fun, to express her art, and to just do something different. So for a lot of individuals it is. I think inherently, sometimes drag artists, they don't think that they're changing the world or dismantling different parts of things, but by inherently existing, you're doing that, because you're saying screw it to the simple gender binary, and you're saying, I'm going to go a step beyond that, and I'm going to create something just for myself that's fun and exciting and this and that. But to, conservatives, it automatically is political, because in and of itself, they're seeing something that goes against their beliefs or their idea of gender, or the historic idea of gender, or the boxes that we have to fit in as a society that's been colonialized. So I think even in our moments, and even drag queens that don't inherently think that they're being political, it's perceived as such. So I think it's like such a dynamic thing that it can be encapsulated as one thing, but you still can have it completely different.
Okay, thanks. Rick, it looked like you were kind of unsure about this. Is there anything you want to say? They touched on it. Okay. All right. So just, I want to stick with the idea of the challenge. So that, and I don't, maybe political, I use the word political. I don't know if I want to use that word. So that the challenge is to the traditional ideas of gender. So I'm a cisgender man, which means cisgender means somebody who identifies with the gender I was assigned at birth. I have a fairly traditional idea of gender, which my wife is trying to challenge on a regular basis, particularly around gender roles and traditional gender roles. But I do feel the challenge of drag. So it makes me a little uncomfortable because I'm fairly traditional. I'm wearing a tie, for God's sake. This is society's leash, right? Anyway, and I think it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And, but that's okay because, I think sometimes we only grow through discomfort. So what kind of growth do you think we might expect through the challenge that drag presents to us, that queer people in general present to us?
I guess I'm the philosopher in the group here, so. That seems a little difficult for me, actually. I actually don't even know how I would answer that question right now. Because in my own brain, I have fought with my own sexuality forever. So for me to be able to answer questions 100% for especially in that area, I still fight with myself. So I may not actually be the best one to answer that question, but I do feel there are more adequate people here to answer, and hopefully with their answers I can start making some things up in my brain as well. But yeah, that's about all I got.
I just want to say that I think, one thing that I think it might do to challenge is seeing the world in a broader view and seeing what it changed our world was just seeing how vast and beautiful people were. So we were always supporters, but when your kids come out, it's a totally different, and I have kids on various of the alphabet, right? So and so it really challenged us, but it also made me just see wonder and beauty in lots of different things.
So basically about being out in the world. And so for me, I knew there was something feminine about me about 30 years ago. It was first year university, it was a long time ago. And it was only 2 years ago I came out. There was a lot of time passed in there. What really got me out, so I accepted my femininity about 12 years ago, something like that, and then worked through what that meant for my life at the time. And then I was really wondering how to come out, and how much, and where, and when. And Jonathan shared earlier today that during Jonathan's coming out journey, it was very much being away from the church. For me, it was very much religious and personal. the answer to me came in a visit from the Holy Spirit, where in that encounter was me being called to in front of St. Peter. And so now my experience being called in front of St. Peter it was a place of love, light, and firm parental direction. And so what St. Peter told me to do was go back and live your life as a woman. To which I promptly said no. Now, as you can imagine, and if you heard Ross's smirk, that's not the smartest thing to say in that situation.
I smirked because it was the response of most of the prophets in the Bible. So,
Well, thank you for that compliment. So I kept getting called back. It happened over weeks or months. The time frame is frankly a bit of a blur. But the last time I got called back, I think it was the 5th time, I just accepted. I said, God, I'm yours. Okay, I don't know what this will be like in my life. I don't know who will accept me. I don't know how it's going to work. I don't know. But I know that I will do it. That was about 3 years ago. I haven't been called back since. So I truly and deeply believe that I'm on the path that God has set out for me. And that path is different than a bunch of the Bible passages say. And I look at it, if anyone ever challenges me, I'm like, so God said I'm a special assignment. Go talk to him or her. But it gives me a really deep faith that when I walk through the mall or whatever and people look at me or snicker or something funny, I just smile at them and keep walking. I swivel, especially if it's guys, I swivel my hips a little more to make them even more uncomfortable. Things like that, right? So for me, it's very personal. It's not definitely about drag, but just about being queer in the world. And that for many people in Red Deer, Central Alberta, and Alberta as a whole, I'm the first trans person they meet in person. Yeah. And I can simply make them uncomfortable in a positive way by smiling at them and saying hi. And then if they feel positive about people like me, because I've had hundreds of women come up to me and compliment me on my hair, my clothes, my makeup, my something, just showing me they accept me as a sister in the sisterhood of women. It's been fantastic and beautiful. That never happened before. Well, partly I wasn't dressed female. But it really just, it's my way of, I believe that's the path God has me on, and part of that is being really public in that. And so doing things like this today are just part of that, are quite natural for me.
Mm-hmm. So the next question, let me just say the next question, because it very much relates to what you just said, which is, how does this, how does this relate to the church's mission? And the Galatians says, in Christ there is no male, female. In Christ there is no Jew nor Greek nor slave nor free nor male or female. So how does it? You talked about that. Let's keep going in that direction.
I'm going to share a story because it's not going to be a long story. Don't worry. My stories do get long, but this one's a nice and short one. So one of the things when I first, or I would say it was a year after I came out, and sorry if I cry. This is a very emotional story. It's been an emotional day. I was with my dad, and my dad is we grew up very Baptist. We were not Pentecostal in any way. We were not really forward-thinking until, like, me and my sister both identify as queer. And they struggled a lot with my older sister when she came out. They shunned her. They didn't talk to her for 2 years. When I came out, it was a different story. So me and my sister share a very difficult relationship because they affirmed me, but they didn't affirm her. So there's a very big contention with that on top of that. So it's a lot for parents to kind of get out of this. But one of the things that I always bring up to anyone that asks, if I believe that this is something, that this is truly who I am, is I was with my dad in the car, and I don't know what we were doing that day. I think we had gotten back from something or other, and I think it was a movie. I would say, like, first part of my life with or first part of my journey with my dad when I came out as queer was difficult. But ever since, he's kind of done a little bit more journeying in and of himself. So we were in the car and we're just talking, and I was about to get out of the car, and my dad just stops and he's like, I just want to say something real fast. He's like, I've followed God all my life. He's like, I have baptized, I've seen people, I've gone to church every day, I read the Bible every day. And he's like, but there's something in you that after you came out was like, it was a big thing. So he had said, he was like, it tells us in the Bible that joy comes from God, and that joy is a God-given thing that he gives to people. And that's not just something we can get in everyday life. And he goes, and I remember, it'll probably live with me for the rest of my life, and he just goes, ever since you came out, you've had a joy that I have looked for my entire life. And I immediately kind of started crying, and I was like, oh my God, okay. And he's like, you being who you are the happiest you have ever been. You emulate joy to so many people, and that joy is not just fake. It's not something you can make up. He's like, I see something in you that I have looked for since I was starting this journey. And he's like, I've never found it. And the fact that you found it after just coming out and being who you are is incredible. He's like, don't change. Don't let that go away, because he's like, you have a gift that he's given you. And it was a big moment for my dad to say something like that. And for me to look into that. He'd been on multiple church boards. He has degrees from colleges. And so for him to say something like that, I knew that who I was, I was on the right path, that I was on the right direction, that this was inherently who I am. And to hide that again, or to shove that back down because of something that, society tells me, or if I want to believe in God, I can't be this. It's extremely harmful, because it makes you believe that love, that joy that you have as being a queer person is inherently you're just making up, that you're just having, and that you're somehow putting on a facade to everyone when that's nowhere near the case. But yeah, so that's something that I walk with every day, and that I see how joyful I am specifically, and how joyful other queer people are, and how we can just find spaces to feel joy. And that, I think, is something so big. But that's kind of, hopefully, somewhat of a good example of that.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is hard for me to say, but I think the thing that, from your previous question, the challenge, what I need to learn is to love through difference. And how can I put this? I like my mental world to be orderly. I like to figure everything out. I like to know where all the pieces belong and everything is in its proper place. And when things aren't in their place, in terms of my mental world, I get disturbed and unhinged. And I think part of the challenge and the learning is to allow people to be different, and not to try to control the behavior of others to conform to my own comfort. And what's deeper than that, I think, is and I think that's a great story, Jonathan. I think a lot of us struggle to accept who we really are. And a lot of us think that we will only be loved by God if we get it all right. And part of, again, what I have learned over the United Church's journey in affirming ministry is that God loves us first. And that love is the beginning of the gospel, not the end for which we strive. Man, that's a hard lesson to learn. But allowing us to be different and allowing each of us to kind of be who we are and to love anyway, maybe will allow us to allow ourselves to be ourselves and to love ourselves anyway, and to accept that God might do that. To me, that's part of the essence of the gospel here. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, I'm wondering if Rick and Candace or Candace might like to speak to this as well. How do you see the church's mission, and how do you see it in being important in your own journeys?
This is a very sensitive mic. So as a lot of you know, back 2 years ago during Pi Day, I did speak, and I kind of spoke on the story of my life and how I was raised in a church where being different got you in trouble. You don't ask questions, follow blind faith. And that kind of confused me for when I was starting to go through my recognition of my sexuality and knowing that being gay was wrong. You're not allowed to be gay. That's an instant ticket to hell, and your whole family's going to hate you, and you're not allowed to speak to them ever again. Where's the love, right? So I did get booted from that church for asking one too many questions, and I fell away from God, which took me a while to find my way back. And as I was coming back through the whole process, I just happened to have moved to Lacombe and started at the United Church. It was a little scary finding my way back, but I found with this church itself, there was nothing but love, acceptance, and to me that was foreign. It felt like these people are wrong. There's something wrong with me. Why would you allow me to be a part of something like this? But now that it's been a 2-year process, and I can safely say I don't feel that at all. I feel more along the lines of a true love of Christ through this church than I ever have in the entirety of my life. So, good job.
Wow. No pressure.
No pressure, hey? So we're not a religious family, but what I want and know that there are queer folks out there who deeply believe, and I want my kids to know that that's okay, that they believe, and we want to support anyone. So we came to Pi Day, actually, that year, and it wasn't my children's thing, but they got to see the love. I've been part of the church down in the basement for a long time. I was the preschool owner for a while, and I've only ever encountered wonderful people here. And so I can't speak to what I hope is that those who need it and who want to find God in their life, they have a safe place. And like from what Rick tells me and whatnot, and what I've seen, and Dave and I have met a few times, it feels safer, and those who want it can find it, and I want to support that however I can for them, because it's important to them. It's not my journey, but it's theirs, and that's okay. So I hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. You want to say something more? Go ahead.
So Rick kind of alluded to it, that one of the few groups in society that's knocking on churches' doors that wants in is the LGBTQ people. And because so many of them have been so poorly treated by an individual or group in the name of Christian or conservative values, they are afraid to walk in the doors. They're simply literally scared to. Yet they want that spirituality, that connection in their life. So that's a key piece of what churches can do. Jonathan talked today, there's one affirming congregation in Lacombe. Well, I'm from Red Deer. There's 50-some churches in Red Deer. There's one affirming congregation in Red Deer, and that's Gates. And so to me, the difference between accepting and affirming, when Dave was just speaking, he talked about acceptance, accepting that God could do things differently and create people differently. That to me would be an accepting church. An affirming church is celebrating that God did create people differently. And the difference to someone who's considering walking through the door and their knees shake as they approach the door and attending a service is a significant difference.
Maybe one last thing. In talking with the people in this, I think a lot of us have noticed there are newer people in the congregation. And as I speak with the newest and the youngest who are associating with this congregation, for almost all of those people, the fact that we are an affirming congregation is, if not the top thing on mind, it's in the top 3.
Okay. Can I add something to this? So I was talking not long ago with one of my colleagues who is the pastor of a conservative evangelical church in Red Deer. And he was talking about the trend in almost all churches for the young people to not participate. And he said that for them and for a lot of conservative evangelical churches, the reason, one of the main reasons why young people are exiting churches in droves is because of their rigid stance towards gay, lesbian, transgendered, and queer, to use that as a catch-all term, people. So this is important. So if we can come back now to the question of drag. And I've been using the term drag event rather than drag show because I'm not sure exactly what, yeah. So I'm wondering about what the vision for, so the request that was made, as I understand it, came from you, Jonathan, to the affirming committee here at St. Andrews. And I'm wondering if you could kind of say a little bit more about because a lot of the questions that I saw were around, what is this going to look like? I mean, is it going to be a nightclub kind of event? Is there going to be nudity? Is there going to be, is it going to be sexualized? Is it going to be really sexual, provocative kind of performances, striptease? Is there going to be alcohol involved? Is there going to be drugs involved? Is there going to be cover charge? Is it going to be like a nightclub? Is it going to, what's it going to be like? So there's just all kinds of questions. So if you could just kind of outline for us what your vision of a drag event that would be what in the church building, what would it look like?
Yeah, I'm excited about this because I've kind of thought over through the process. Lots of time has given me lots of time to think. So what really I've developed, so I've started off with a name, and that's where I kind of built everything. I call it Drag from the Heart. Basically, it's going to more look like, if you're looking like, have you ever seen like live art shows where they're very engaging with the audience? They're very, the people there are, being a part of this. They're being welcomed in to understand this person's art. So this is what I really wanted to do with it. I want it to be kind of more so for all ages so that everyone can experience, and if anyone wants to bring kids, they can, but everyone can experience drag. And so part of this is I want to develop different types of styles of drag, so different types of drag shows. So basically, one might be for kings specifically to come and showcase what drag really means to them.
Wait, what's a drag? What's a king?
Sorry, yes. So a king is usually a feminine person who dresses up as a male drag artist. So more male presenting people will do female drag, and then more female presenting people will do male drag. Sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes they'll do very similar things to affirm the gender or either or. It's a very dynamic space. And part of what I want to do with this is support different charities after that. So still kind of work towards having like this show that's developed to teach you about what drag means to individual drag artists, but also that supports more than just what we do and more than just drag, that actually supports other agencies, other things that have affirmed who they are. So part of it, say, something that I feel would be a really great one for me specifically would be, say, a bearded drag queen show where I get a few of my bearded drag queen friends to come perform and say we pick a charity, maybe something towards men's mental health, on how we can raise money for that and how we can use our drag as male presenting people to support to support individual or different organizations. So I want it to be kind of a display. Time and logistics, not sure, I haven't really figured those ones out yet, but more so the idea is to create an art showcase almost that welcomes people to be curious, to see drag on a different perspective and a different lens, but in a very open and safe environment that's good for really anyone, or if you haven't experienced drag, or if you have, that can come and maybe you might feel uncomfortable with it, but not feel like so uncomfortable that you're gonna leave, but just feel uncomfortable in the questions of like, oh, this is interesting. I've never thought of this way. So that's kind of what I want this show to be about. Is I really want it to encapsulate the art of drag and welcome people in that don't regularly see drag shows, that maybe do regularly see drag shows but want to see something in Lacombe or want to see. So it's a very myriad of different kind of things, and that's my main goal with it. Oh yeah, we wouldn't have alcohol and things like that. That was something I was like, nah, I was like, it wouldn't be risky or nudity or anything kind of in that realm. And one of the things with drag artists is that we know we will communicate what space this is. So if there's a drag artist that does more of like some other more adult themed shows or more burlesque shows, but still has different forms of their art, I just ask them, this is a family friendly event. If we can just make sure everything kind of evolves around that. And they're like, yep, sounds good. They will put on more clothes, they will dress up, they will pick a song that is appropriate for all ages, so that not only are they being respectful of the space, but they're still getting to perform and they're still getting to have people enjoy their art. But they're willing to adjust their regular performance or try something different, or this is something they regularly do. I know there's a drag queen in Red Deer called Kelly Electrics. She does regularly drag story hours with RDQCA, which is a queer organization in Red Deer. She loves the art of drag. She develops numbers that encapsulate different aspects of her drag, and she uses that to showcase different things. We had her at our adult show, but you know, she has done drag story time, she has done Pride in the Park. We've had her for different Pride in the Parks for the last 2 years, and she's amazing. She's so sweet. If you ever get to meet her, talk to her, because she really loves the idea that drag is not just something you do, it's something that you believe in, it's a part of you. So that's kind of what I really want out of that show.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Can you tell us why you're asking a church, or this church in particular, to host a drag event, and why not have it in some other location, some other venue?
One, Lacombe is very small. There's not very many out there. Anyways, no, honestly, ever since kind of we started with Lacombe Pride is a secular organization. We don't associate with really any forms of religion. And this was a way for me to say, like, as an individual, that I really want to welcome queer people into a space such as this. And I've talked with Dave multiple times about how St. Andrews can start, be a queer staple in Lacombe. Because I think there's great things with affirming, and a great aspect of that I just don't think a lot of people know. And that's kind of the unfortunate thing, is I really want people to feel invited and welcomed into a space like this, because I have met many of you all, and you all are beautiful people. We've had volunteers from St. Andrews come to our events. You've walked with us in the parades. You've been with us for a long time. And one of the things that I fully believe in is that every queer person needs support. And whether you are someone who believes in Christianity or believes or that you're Muslim or you believe in a different form of religion, is that you need that support no matter where you are. And sometimes a secular organization can't speak to someone's queer journey like that. And I would probably, like, for Rick, I would say it's like having us like say, us go like, oh yeah, we know about, that journey, we can help you, and not having any idea about his past or his relationship with the church and us not having any correlation, it's not very helpful. It's so having a space for showing that this is a safe for people to come in, ask questions is really important. And I think me and Dave agree on is that affirming is not just, again, stopping and saying, we accept you, but it's advocating for more. So by doing a drag show here, one that's about art, one that's about the community and why it's important to individual people, is making way for people to feel comfortable in a very, this is a very ornate church. It is outside, it's a church. Inside, it's a church, all those things. And sometimes even just the building in and of itself can be stressful for queer individuals. So when you say, I'm doing a drag show, oh, where? St. Andrews. They're like, wait, what the heck? That's a church. And you're like, yeah, we've had conversations about it. We want more people to be involved and welcomed into this space. And it's something important for queer Christians to feel like they're being welcomed and supported and that their community is being amplified as much as their fellowship as well. So I think that is really where I wanted it to start. But I also know St. Andrews is greatly affirming, and I know that I have had great conversations, and I knew that if I communicated what I wanted out of this show and what I wanted the show to be like, that people would support it and they would hear that and be like, that sounds really cool. Let's do something like that. Whereas not every space will do that. They'll hear it and go, meh, whatever. Doesn't make us money, doesn't do this, whatever, well, let's put it aside. So it's just multiple different ways that we can support one another, that you guys can support the queer community more, but that I can say that this is also a church that welcomes and accepts you, and I think it leads into more conversations on how we can better our relationship with the 2S LGBTQIA community within Lacombe.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah. So I'm not part of what Jonathan is planning here at St. Andrews, but as part of being Gates and on the Affirm Committee in Red Deer, we have talked about the possibility of holding drag shows at Gates. And a big reason for that is that opportunity to have that conversation that Christianity and 2S LGBT+ can work together, as so many people believe it cannot. Now, we've actually looked at I think we have the opposite challenge in Red Deer. There are, I think, 6 to 8 different bars that have hosted drag shows. There's multiple other public venues that are available, some of which are serve alcohol and some that allow alcohol to be served and some of which don't. There's actually a lot of competition for venues that we would have to overcome to actually hold one at our church. So that having several venues as competition has held us back from hosting one. That's one of the things. Whereas here in Lacombe, there's an entirely different perspective on that, even though we are only 30 kilometers apart.
Thanks. And just to be clear, when you talk about this space, you're actually thinking about using the hall. Am I correct? Not the sanctuary. Okay, so just to clarify that point. So there's a whole bunch of other questions that and some of them I just kind of intentionally, between the Affirm Committee and myself, we kind of just named them as being ones that can be discussed at a later date and as part of the decision-making process. There were questions about time frame, evening, or, how late in the evening, or maybe daytime. Questions about security, how that would work, especially if there are protests or kind of people that are mad about it. Frequency, that kind of thing. And there was some, so if you're wondering what happened to your question, that it's now almost 2:30, and we're going to try and be done pretty close to 2:30. So just know we couldn't deal with everything today, but we do expect that your questions will be dealt with. Many of them have been answered already, but so I want to close with a question about protests and backlash, and I'm wondering if you can talk. And particularly, I want to invite the people who are who experience, people who personally experienced, backlash, to talk about that, because I'm aware that the idea of us as a church, and I still think of myself as part of this church, experiencing a backlash is because we are allying ourselves or welcoming queer community is something that we're just getting the barest hint of it. Because the queer people get this on a regular basis, and so I'll raise the question: What do you think the backlash? If there's a backlash, what might it look like? How would that affect the congregation?
So something that, I know other organizations have dealt with is, of course, nasty letters or emails targeted towards you. Specifically, it'll just really contain some gross language. It will be quite nasty. And I find that Lacombe specifically, and I think this is the nuance of this city specifically, most of you know about the Lacombe community page on Facebook and how interesting that is some days. And sometimes, we, as an organization, Lacombe Pride, I don't share information on there. Almost at all. I share it when we have our Pride, I put the Pride poster on there, and I walk away. And I'm like, no more than that. Because what will happen is, in sheer number of minutes, we have watched this. We take care of the social media. We have watched in sheer number of minutes how many people comment, "You're going to hell, you're pedophiles, you're disgusting, you're inhuman, you're attacking our children, you're making things..." I posted one time. The likes aren't even the thing. It'll be a few downvotes. In the span of an hour, I had 129 comments on a post that I posted about Pride. Some of the most grotesque things, to the point that I personally got a threat of gun violence. Someone was advocating for me to be shot, and they said I would come and shoot you. I took it down. I was like, nope, we're not doing this. This is too dangerous. This is too hard. And so we always prepare for these things at our events, and we're like, oh my gosh, we're gonna get protesters or something. I don't think we've ever had a single protester ever come to our event. A lot of the people in this community are what we call keyboard warriors, where they are so comfortable with commenting something disgusting or nasty, making noise, making hate, behind their computer, and they threaten and they attack and they throw letters and they do all this. But when it comes down to it, they're too afraid to step outside. They're not gonna come and try and, because they know that, for one, we have people that will, shout back, and we'll have people that, I will gladly throw my heel across the street if I have to. But they know that, this is the thing, we've shared multiple different events on that page, and we have never had an issue. We've had people be like, oh, let's go preach, let's go and, throw stuff at or not throw stuff, but go to these events, and they never show up. I think last year we had 2 Mormons show up, but they were just curious. They were just walking around and talking with people. And
Considering all the events we've had,
yeah.
we haven't had to
ever had a problem. We've had a lot of personal things, and that's what happens as an organization. And I know for a fact that in other communities that is a big thing. But in Lacombe, I find that there's barely any backlash, and that you don't get many people that come out and want to do something like that, because I don't even know why. They're honestly just too chicken. But and everyone knows each other. So, I know most of the people probably within this room from either like a secondhand interaction, or you've been involved with Lacombe Pride or something like that. And I know that you probably know other people that probably don't like queer people, or I know people that don't like queer people. In this town, you take one photo, you post it online, 5 other people go, oh, that's John from just down the road. Now, what are they doing there? Like, are they being that crowd? Like, you start just chaos. So people know that this community is small enough that it will get either back to their job, get back to their friends, that they're not willing to do that. But also, it's just a waste of time. And I think people understand that. To protest something like that, it's ultimately a waste of time. So I think that's the biggest thing, and I think the biggest thing you'll get, maybe some messages. But I always say, too, is that this is something we deal with every single day. I have gone to drag shows where I've gotten threats. I have been to other Pride celebrations where they shout the F slur while they're driving by. They've put up their finger. Like, there's a lot of different things out there that we personally get. And when it comes to an inherently straight organization or something that is perceived as such, it's more put into question. It's like, well, what are they doing? Like, why are they doing this? And it's not so much like you're outrightly saying, oh, you're going to hell, because it's a church. So I feel like that would be kind of difficult. But yeah, so I think in that regards, it would be mostly letters and people just maybe saying a few comments on your Facebook page. That might be a little nasty. But other than that, I don't see many people doing much.
No, thanks.
So a couple examples, one from our church in Red Deer at Gates, and one from, I guess, from personal. But the church one, so there's a risk with renting to anybody for anything and how you'll be associated with it. And so in the last few weeks, Gates has been hosting candlelight concerts. There's 4 members of the symphony that come and perform at the front, and it works great in an acoustic space. So Gates rents the space to them. We have a couple people there just as don't even usher people in. We're just hosts at the church to know, like, where's the light switches type of stuff, right? Well, the last time they were doing all their electrical stuff for how the tickets work, and that wouldn't work. So people were told that the doors would open at 5:45. That's what the organizers said. The doors did not actually open until 6:15. It was a nice evening. People were livid. And they blamed the church because it was at the church. And we're like, go ask the organizer. But that's not the one. They're just angry, right? Now, the organizer, to their credit, at the start of, imagine so we started a music event 30 minutes after it was scheduled to start, that's not the show must go on time, right? But that's what happened. And so now the organizer got up and at the beginning and grabbed the mic and apologized for what did a very nice job of apologizing. So, people left in a much better mood. They did 4 seasons of Vivaldi, and hopefully that makes people feel better in general, right? So there's a risk with any renter. Now, and also I guess at Gates, we're right downtown, right across from City Hall. We've got a couple rainbows on our steps, and we sometimes discuss at board meetings about the potential for physical damage to our property or for people arriving at events. How do we keep things safe? And it's just, there's a different kind of homeless percentage downtown Red Deer, and so there's the potential vandalism for people trying to access the property just to survive life, as well as the potential for people looking to harm it because it's that. We have had a couple people in the last year that a couple of young men that they'll show up on Sunday with a Bible, and if that happens, we actually welcome them warmly because they might be members of our community. Those couple times, They were not. They couldn't believe we actually had a rainbow flag for a church. But they came for coffee after and talked, but they weren't there to learn. They were there to preach as to why we were all going to hell. So they left peacefully. But those are some of the kind of risks that just exist, period. And as far as personally, yeah, everybody I know, it's about the out in the world. It's challenging to be safe, and what does that look like for each person?
Thank you. Thanks for that. So let me just acknowledge that there are some risks associated with this, that you've kind of been very clear about that, both what they are and what they aren't. Thank you for that. And but also, the fact that there are risks doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. I'm not suggesting that, I'm not taking sides in this. I'm not suggesting that you should do it or shouldn't do it. Maybe it's not the right time. But I also kind of think, the fact that there may be risks associated with it doesn't mean that as a church we shouldn't do it, because it may be that this is an example of Jesus calling us to take up your cross and follow me. So that's a part of the discernment, right? Is this an example of Jesus calling us to take up your cross and follow me? I want to just give everybody a chance briefly for a final word, and then I think we'll be done. And Dave, I will, if you could just kind of outline for us the next steps in the process. Okay, so do you want to start with Rick? Yeah.
Final word. One of the big things that I am a big believer in, being a part of this congregation, is if we don't show up to all the events that are going on, they win. We need to show that we do have the support. We do have people that are willing to fight for us, and being out there in the public instead of just from behind a door. Anybody can be supportive here, but outside it's scarier, and I get it.
I came because Rick asked me to. But honestly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to sit with all of you. My experience is different as a parent, but I'm grateful to speak to anyone if they have any questions, and I can try and answer. But just thank you for welcoming me in.
Candace doesn't give herself enough credit, but I was going to say she's pretty good at answering questions, in my opinion. I'll emanate that. Thank you today. This is something that, a journey that I wanted to do. I've wanted to develop a regular drag show in Lacombe, because I think it's important for people to understand the importance of drag to the queer community, which is also just fun. Like, I think so many times that we forget that we get so caught up in all the chaos of things. I think we just forget about the fun aspect of drag. I love drag because it's simply fun. I get to be someone different. I get to express myself differently. I get to take time out of my day to... I spend 4 hours on doing my makeup. It's too much, but it's fine. And gluing down brows is no fun. Don't get me started on that. But it's so important for me, and someone who's grown up in the church, who's grown up understanding kind of the more negative sides of what the church says about queer people. It's really invigorating to be welcomed, to be supported, to be given an opportunity to talk and speak about my community, about my own personal journey, and about what I really want to do to not only kind of continue on a journey of myself in a general sphere, but also for the community to feel that they can experience something different. Because, like, as much as I love Lacombe, sometimes we do the same events over and over. So it's important for me for that. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here today and for hosting this conversation. And I guess the thought one of the things to share with you is that the last few years that I've been out, one of the blessings that I have experienced is the sheer volume of people who will come up to me. And this is largely straight, white cisgender people, and they will tell me about their kid, their grandkid, their niece, their nephew, their cousin in Toronto, somebody in their life who's part of the queer community. And they often end with it. They are so glad to see me out in public, in society, because it gives them hope for that person's future. So my message, I guess, from that, what I've received, is there's a significantly greater acceptance by people of these individuals throughout society than they let on to their friends and neighbors. And so I encourage all those people who love someone enough to share with your friends and neighbors, and just for the congregation to know that that percentage, a high percentage of people, is that accepting and affirming in their lives.
I just want to say thank you, Ross, for hauling over here at high speed and
Speed limit.
putting a lot of extra effort into this. Thank you. And I want to say thank you to the panel. Thank you for digging into your deeper parts and being honest and vulnerable. Really appreciate that. And really appreciate your speaking at the service, Jonathan. And thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of you for submitting questions and for being here, and for all of you online whenever you're looking at this. Thanks for taking the time and the effort to try to understand how this fits in, what's going to happen later. We've dealt with some of the questions, and the idea here is, before we start to argue, talk about this, before we start a decision-making process, we want to have a good level of knowledge, and hopefully common knowledge, from which we can then work. So we'll be looking at the questions that were answered here, the questions that were not answered, and try to kind of build up that base a little bit. The next step in this is going to be to start to put the arguments for and against, in this case, or what do we need to, if we're going to make a decision about this, what do we need to consider? What are the possible benefits? What are the possible challenges? How does this fit with our mission? We want to put some of that onto the table before we start taking sides ourselves. We want to try to assemble as much as possible what are the arguments we're going to be making, and what do we need to consider, so that we are, again, in the discernment process. We want to set aside our own initial positions and be open to considering the whole kind of range of ideas and arguments on this subject. So the next stage, after we kind of do the question answering, is going to be to kind of put the arguments on the table and organize them, and then we will start to talk about, okay, how do we make this decision? Are we going to use consensus? Are we going to take a vote? What are we going to? How do we come together on this? And then we will start to kind of have the arguments and say, okay, so what do we think is the faithful thing to do? So we got a couple steps before we start to actually enter into the decision-making process. And the next stage is going to be to just, okay, we're gonna try and get everything onto the table where we can all see it, and then we'll try to sort out what's wise. And we'll be putting together the process along the way. So it's going to be a kind of a back and forth, and I think the Affirm team has taken the responsibility to kind of be the organizers of the process, so that's who to talk to, I guess, or to myself or Barbara. Does that make sense? So thank you all very much for being here. It's been a long Sunday and a good one, I think. Thanks very much.
So just real quick, the earliest Christians weren't called Christians. They were called walkers in the way. Walkers in the way. And it was about that sense of journey, that sense of, we're going to take a step here and a step there. It's not about one step. It's about a journey that begins with a single step. So I just invite you and thank you for being part of this first step. Maybe second step, maybe third step. Anyway, I'm not sure it's the first step. For being a part of this step, and bless you on that journey. And may the Lord bless and keep you as you carry on in this.